These paranormal accounts were documented by healthcare professionals.
I've been a paramedic long enough to know when a radio call doesn't belong to the living. You feel it before you process it, like a pressure change inside the cab, a dip in the noise floor of the world. That's how it started for me. Rolling eastbound through Cleveland, lights off, coffee going cold in the cup holder, the city breathing its usual after-midnight breath. My name's Marcus Hale, Medic 14. Night rotation. 12-hour shifts that stretch longer than they should. You get used to patterns, bar fights at closing, overdoses near the river, chest pains that aren't heart attacks but feel real enough to scare someone straight for a week. Radios chatter. Dispatch keeps the rhythm. At 2:41 a.m., the rhythm broke. Code Blue, requesting immediate response, came through my unit radio, clipped and distorted. No unit number, no dispatcher ID, just the phrase that flips a switch in your spine. Code Blue isn't field language, that's hospital talk. Cardiac arrest inside controlled walls, not something you hear cruising city streets. I keyed the mic. Dispatch, repeat last. Who's calling? Static. Then the voice again, weaker now, like it had traveled a long way to reach me. Code Blue, patient down, East 55th and St. Clair. My hands tightened on the wheel. That intersection lit up in my head for reasons I didn't want to catalog. It's where Ambulance 6 went down 6 years ago. T-boned by a delivery truck running red. EMT dead on scene. Patient didn't make it. Whole thing turned into a case study and a plaque in the bay nobody looks at. Ambulance 6 was decommissioned, scrapped, gone. Dispatch, I said again, slower. Confirm source of call. Nothing. The radio hissed like breath through cracked lips. Protocol says you don't self-dispatch on ghosts. Protocol also says you don't ignore a code blue if there's even a 1% chance it's real. So I turned the wheel and headed north, tires humming, city lights thinning into long sodium streaks. As I approached East 55th, the radio came alive again. Same voice, same broken cadence. Compressions in progress, monitor not responding. I could hear it then, the faint, off-tempo thump beneath the static. CPR. Someone counting under their breath, numbers dissolving into effort. The intersection was empty when I arrived. No flares, no wreckage, just asphalt patched and repatched, dark with old oil stains that never quite fade. I stopped the rig and stepped out. The night smelled metallic, like rain that never came. Unit calling code blue, I said into the dark. Identify yourself. The answer came from behind me, from the radio inside the cab, louder now, urgent. We're losing him. I climbed back in and stared at the dashboard. The display flickered, then briefly showed a unit ID that made my stomach drop. AMB-06. My pulse spiked. I unplugged the radio. The voice kept bowing. I remembered the after-action reports, how Ambulance 6 had been cleared for service that night despite a faulty cardiac monitor. How the EMT, Jonah Pierce, had insisted on running the call anyway. How witnesses said he'd stayed in the back doing compressions even after the impact, hands moving on a body that couldn't be saved. The radio crackled. Marcus, the voice said. My name, dragged through static. Vitals are dropping. I don't remember deciding to answer. I just did. What's the patient's status? For a moment, there was only breathing, ragged, determined. then, still pulseless. The intersection felt crowded all of a sudden, like memory had mass. Headlights flickered at the edge of my vision, red strobes that weren't there. I smelled antifreeze, heard glass skitter across pavement. "Call it," I said quietly. "You've done everything." Silence. Then a long tone, flat and unwavering. The sound every medic dreads, because it means the end of options. The voice softened. "Time of death, 02:41. The radio went dead, for good this time. I sat there until the sky started to pale, hands still on the wheel, heart doing its best impression of a runaway monitor. When I finally drove off, the intersection looked like any other, just another place where something bad once happened, and the city moved on. But every few months, when the night is quiet and the radio bandwidth opens up just enough, I hear again. Not the whole call, just a fragment, a breath, a count, a reminder that some emergencies never clear. They just keep calling, waiting for someone to answer.
I work nights because nights make sense. Fewer people, fewer conversations, fewer explanations required when something feels off. On the day shift, everything is noise and protocol and family members asking the same question in different ways. At night, it's just the monitors, the IV pumps, the soft alarms, and the long clinical patience of the building itself. My name is Elena Ward, RN, night charge on 4 West at Baltimore Memorial Hospital. Cardiac step-down, old wing, the kind of place where the walls hum even when nothing's running. The first time I saw him, I told myself it was fatigue. It was 3:12 a.m. exactly, because I remember checking the wall clock as I walked past room 417. The room was supposed to be empty. The patient, Mr. Howard Green, had coded there 3 nights earlier. Asystole, full arrest. We ran the algorithm until there was nothing left to run. Time of death, 0312. That's not lost on me now. But that first night, I glanced in out of habit, and there he was, standing beside the bed. Hospital gown, bare feet on the linoleum, one hand resting on the side rail, the other hovering near the cardiac monitor like he was about to silence an alarm. The monitor was unplugged. I froze in the doorway, brain cycling through the usual differential, shadow, reflection, floaters, sleep deprivation. I blinked hard. He didn't disappear. He looked focused, calm, like a patient waiting for numbers to make sense. Then he turned his head slightly toward me, not fully, not confrontational, and I felt something in my chest drop, the way it does right before a code gets called overhead. I stepped back. The hallway lights flickered. When I looked again, the room was empty. I didn't write it up. You don't chart things like that. You learn early what belongs in the record and what belongs nowhere at all. The second time, I heard him before I saw him. A soft, rhythmic beeping, too slow to be sinus tach, too steady to be artifact. I followed the sound down the hall, past rooms 412 through 416, straight back to 417. Same time, 3:12 a.m. The door was open. The bed was still stripped, plastic mattress exposed. Mr. Green was there again. This time he was closer to the monitor, head tilted, brow furrowed in concentration. He lifted his hand and tapped the dark screen once, like it had betrayed him. "Vitals don't lie," he said quietly. Not to me, to the machine. I don't remember deciding to speak. I just did. "You're discharged," I told him, my voice steady in that automatic nurse way. "You don't need to be here." He smiled at that. Not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. "Someone still checks," he replied. After that, it became routine. Every night at 3:12, he appeared. Always the same posture, always the same focus. Sometimes he adjusted imaginary leads. Sometimes he leaned in, listening for a heartbeat that wasn't there. He never acknowledged me unless I spoke first, and I learned quickly not to speak unless I was ready for an answer. Things started changing around the unit. Telemetry alarms tripped with no patients attached. Portable monitors powered on by themselves, showing flat lines that resolved when you blinked. One nurse swore she saw a man reflected in the glass of the medroom fridge, standing right behind her. She transferred to days a week later. I stayed, because part of me understood. I lost my father in a hospital room not unlike 417. Same fluorescent lighting, same detached efficiency at the end. I remembered how I'd watched the monitor like it could negotiate on his behalf, like numbers could argue with death. Mr. Green wasn't haunting us. He was rounding. The night it ended, the hospital lost power. Emergency generators kicked in, but 4 West lagged behind just enough. Darkness to stretch the shadows into something old and deliberate. I stood outside room 417 at 3:11 a.m., heart pounding, knowing he'd be there. And he was. But this time, the monitor was on. Green waveform, steady rhythm, a heart rate in the 60s. Impossible. Mr. Green straightened, satisfied. He looked at me fully for the first time. "Vitals are stable. You can stop checking now." The monitor went black. The lights surged back. The room emptied. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just finished. Room 417 has stayed quiet ever since. The hospital says it was electrical interference, old wiring, residual charge. I sign off on charts and let them say it. But every night when my shift rolls past 3:12, I still glance at the clock, and somewhere, deep in the building, I swear I hear a single monitor beep, just once, like a final confirmation before silence.
You're listening to Lurking Moon. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe.
Hospitals have a sound you only notice once you've worked in one long enough. It's not the alarms or the intercoms or the squeak of carts. It's the background hum, the electrical breathing of the building itself. I've been a nurse for 12 years, and I can tell when that hum changes. The night I heard the whisper, it changed all at once, like someone had leaned close to the walls and exhaled. My name is Rachel Monroe, RN, night shift med-surg float, St. Louis General Hospital. I cover whatever unit is short, which is how I ended up near the old pediatric wing, West Annex, closed since before I was born. Everyone knows it's off limits. Fire damage, asbestos, outdated wiring. The official reasons stack neatly, the unofficial ones don't. I was restocking IV fluids around 1:30 a.m. when I heard it. Water? It was soft, dry, not scared, just tired. The kind of voice that comes from a throat that's been asking for too long. I froze, saline bag halfway onto the shelf. Pediatric calls hit different. They always have, even when they're routine, even when they're fine. But there were no pediatric patients on my census that night. 0. I checked twice. "Hello?" I called, already knowing I shouldn't. The voice came again, closer this time. "Can I have some water?" It wasn't echoing down the hall. It was coming from the direction of West Annex. I told myself it was a trick of acoustics. Old buildings do that, carry sound through ducts, bend it into something that feels personal. I finished stocking, logged the supply count, and tried to forget it. That lasted about 10 minutes. I passed the double doors to the closed wing on my way back to the nurses' station. They were chained, dust thick on the push bars, warning placards yellowed with age. And from behind them, clear as if someone stood on the other side with their mouth to the crack, a child whispered, "Please." I didn't scream. I didn't run. I pressed my palm to the door, stupid instinct overriding training. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, my voice low, professional, the voice you use when you don't want fear to hear itself. "I'm thirsty. It's hot." That's when the smell hit me. Not smoke, old smoke, burned plastic and damp ash, faint but unmistakable, like opening a box that's been closed for decades. I asked the charge nurse if anyone else had heard anything. She looked at me for a second too long, then said, "Just don't linger over there." No denial, no curiosity, just that. Later, another nurse, Lena, ICU float, caught up with me in the break room. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "The kid." Apparently, this wasn't new. Every few months, someone heard it, always at night, always asking for water. Maintenance refused to go into West Annex alone. Security logged motion alerts that never matched camera footage. Administration called it stress. I looked it up after my shift. Hospital archives, local news clippings. The fire happened in 1984. Electrical fault. Pediatric ward, overnight. Smoke spread faster than staff could evacuate. Officially, 6 children died. Unofficially, records were incomplete. Some charts ended mid-sentence. Some names were crossed out and rewritten. One name kept appearing in the margins. Emily Hart, age 7, dehydrated, post-op, restricted fluids, waiting for morning rounds. My next shift, I brought a bottle of water, sealed, cold. At 2:17 a.m., the whisper returned. "Water?" I stood by the chain doors, heart hammering, the bottle slick in my hand. "I have some," I said, "but you can't stay here." There was a pause, then, softer than before, they said no. "I'm saying yes," I replied, surprising myself. The air behind the doors cooled, like a vent had kicked on. I slid the bottle through the narrow gap at the bottom. Ridiculous, symbolic, necessary. It rolled out of sight. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard it, the faint twist of a cap, the smallest swallow, relief carried on breath. "Thank you," the voice said. The hum of the building settled, easing back into its normal rhythm. The smell faded. The hallway felt empty again. They sealed West Annex permanently a month later. No more whispers, no more alerts. The official memo cited safety. But sometimes when I pass the locked doors, I leave a bottle of water by the frame, just in case someone's still waiting. Hospitals don't forget people. They forget equipment, forget protocols, forget promises, but they don't forget people. Names linger in handover notes, in handwritten margins, in half-erased labels on old lockers. And sometimes, if you work nights long enough, you start to think the people don't forget the hospital either. My name is Caroline Hayes, RN, night shift supervisor at Savannah Mercy Harbor Hospital.
a brick labyrinth that started as a charity infirmary in the 1920s and grew into something modern only by adding glass and steel around its bones. The old wing still exists inside it, like a fossil wrapped in plastic. The first time I saw her, I assumed agency float. She stood at the time clock in the staff corridor, posture perfect, hair pinned in a style I'd only seen in training manuals from the 40s. Her uniform wasn't scrubs. Pressed white dress, starched cap, small enamel pin shaped like a lamp. She held a pen with deliberate care and signed the logbook with cursive that looked practiced, ceremonial. "Evening," I said, tapping my badge against the reader. "You new tonight's?" She turned, smiling politely. Her eyes were calm, professional, the kind that reassures patients before procedures. "No," she said, "I've always preferred nights." Her voice was low and composed, with that clipped cadence older nurses sometimes keep. She nodded once, capped her pen, and walked toward the old wing corridor. I didn't think much of it until payroll flagged the sign-in. We still keep a physical logbook out of habit, a redundant system for downtime. Her name was written there in ink, neat and controlled. M. Caldwell. No employee number, no badge scan, no profile in HR. "Agency forgot to onboard?" I asked HR. They checked. There was no Caldwell on contract, no Caldwell in records, no Caldwell ever on staff. Probably someone's prank, or a visitor got into the hallway. Visitors don't wear vintage uniforms and carry themselves like a charge nurse. The second time, she clocked out. I was charting at 6:58 a.m. when I heard the soft click of the pen again. She stood at the logbook, removing her cap, smoothing her hair. She signed the time, folded her hands, and looked at me with that same composed expression. "Quiet night?" I asked. "Productive. No deaths." The way she said it felt deliberate. "See you tonight?" I joked. She hesitated. "Yes, if they still need me." She walked away, footsteps barely audible on the linoleum. Security footage from that corridor showed nothing. The camera recorded the pen moving, the page turning, the door opening, but no person. After that, other staff started noticing her. Nina, one of our ICU nurses, said she saw a woman in a nurse's dress adjusting pillows in room 312, speaking softly to a delirious patient. The patient calmed immediately. When Nina entered, the woman was gone. The pillows were perfectly aligned. Dr. Patel claimed someone prepped an OR case before his arrival, instruments arranged with meticulous precision he hadn't seen since residency. He thought it was one of the older nurses, until he realized none of us had been there. Her signature kept appearing in the logbook, always precise, always in and out at the same times, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., no overtime, no sick days. I started digging. Old hospital archives are kept in the basement next to records that never made it to digital. Dusty binders, yellowed photographs, employee rosters typed on onion skin paper. I found her in a staff photo from 1947, Margaret Caldwell, RN. She stood in the back row, hands folded, wearing the same uniform, the same pin. Notes in the margin said she was known for exceptional composure during night casualties. Another document referenced a disciplinary inquiry for falsifying patient death times. I kept reading. Margaret Caldwell had been accused of delaying documentation of deaths to keep morale stable during a post-war influenza surge. She believed recording deaths at dawn was kinder to families, to staff, to the hospital's reputation. She was suspended pending investigation. She never showed up to the hearing. The final note said she was last seen signing out at the time clock. No termination paperwork, no obituary, no trace. That night, I waited by the logbook. She arrived at 7 p.m. on the dot, pen poised, expression serene. I stepped forward. "You never left," I said. She looked up, eyes searching my face, then nodded slowly. "Someone has to maintain continuity. You're not on payroll." She smiled faintly. "Neither are many of the duties we perform." I held up the archive photo. "You suspended you." "They misunderstood me." She tapped the book once. "The record shapes reality. When you mark someone gone, they become gone. When you delay, they remain." "You altered death chimes." "I preserved order," she corrected. Her gaze drifted down the hallway toward the ICU. "Chaos spreads when death is acknowledged too loudly." I thought of our modern dashboards, real-time mortality metrics, family dashboards, transparency mandates, everything documented, nothing delayed. "You're still clocking in." "Yes," she said, "they still need me." A code blue alarm went off 2 doors down. We ran. The patient was already gone when we arrived, but the monitors were quiet. Someone had silenced them. The room was neat, the body positioned respectfully, family notified promptly. Her handwriting was on the death note draft, pre-filled. When I returned to the corridor, she was signing out. "Good shift," she said. "No unnecessary distress." "You're rewriting reality." She capped her ken. "Reality is what is documented." She walked toward the old wing and vanished into it, as she always did. Administration replaced the logbook with a digital terminal last month. Her signature hasn't appeared since. But sometimes, when I review the electronic time cards at dawn, I see a blank entry, an employee ID that doesn't resolve, a shift perfectly logged with no name attached. And every patient death on those nights is timestamped at exactly 7 a.m.
You learn to ignore a lot in a trauma bay. Peripheral motion, reflections in stainless steel, your own pulse hammering in your ears. If you reacted to every flicker of movement, you'd never get anything done. That's what I told myself the first time I saw it, standing perfectly still in the far corner of Trauma Room 3 at Los Angeles County General, while a man bled out on the table. My name is Daniel Keyes, MD, trauma surgery, nights. The kind of shifts where time compresses into procedures and decisions, where the outside world might as well not exist. That night started like any other. GSW to the abdomen, hypotensive on arrival, massive transfusion protocol activated. Controlled chaos, everyone moving with purpose. Except the shadow. It didn't register immediately. I was focused on the field, suction, clamps, finding the source. But somewhere between calling for more O-negative and barking at anesthesia to keep him alive, I felt it, that sense of being watched without being seen directly. I glanced up, instinctively checking the monitor, then the doorway, the corner. There was a shape there where the light should have been clean, a darker absence against the pale green walls. Human-sized, upright. No features, no movement. Just present. "Who's back there?" I snapped, thinking it was a resident frozen by nerves. No one answered. No one turned. I looked again. It was still there. "Daniel," Dr. Kim said from across the table, irritation edging her voice. "Focus." I did. We cracked the chest, found the bleed, worked fast. The shadow didn't move. It didn't react to alarms, to shouting, to blood hitting the floor. It just stood there, like it had clocked in for the procedure. The patient coded at 0146. We worked him for 22 minutes. When I finally called it, the room went quiet in that unnatural way only death can impose. And the shadow was gone. No one mentioned it. You don't bring up things that sound like burnout or hallucination unless you want psych evals quietly suggested. I scrubbed out, wrote my note, and went home to sleep that never came. The second time, I wasn't alone. Multi-vehicle collision, blunt force trauma, young woman, severe internal injuries. Trauma room 3 again, because of course it was. Halfway through the laparotomy, the anesthesiologist, Maya, leaned close to me. "Is there someone standing behind you?" she asked, voice low, careful. I didn't look right away. I didn't want to confirm it. "Yes," I said finally. "In the corner." "It's not moving," she said. "No." The patient's pressure dropped suddenly, massive bleed we hadn't identified yet. As we scrambled, I felt something change in the room. Not temperature, not light, but tension, like the air had decided on an outcome. The shadow seemed denser. We found the rupture too late. When I called time of death, Maya exhaled shakily. "What the hell was that?" she asked. No one answered her, but 2 nurses avoided looking at the corner as they cleaned the room. After that, I started paying attention. It only appeared during emergency surgeries, never electives, never routine cases, only when death was a possibility or a probability. It always stood in the same corner, never crossed a line, never interfered. And it always left when the procedure ended, regardless of outcome. I asked around carefully, framed it as superstition, gallows humor. Turns out, people had noticed. A scrub tech admitted she'd started positioning equipment to block that corner from her line of sight. A resident transferred after swearing the shadow leaned closer when his patient's vitals crashed. Security logs showed no unauthorized entries, but motion sensors in Trauma 3 triggered consistently during cases, with no visible source. I dug into the room's history. Trauma 3 had been an OR long before it was a trauma bay. In the late 80s, during a stretch of gang violence that overwhelmed the system, one surgeon worked nearly non-stop there. Dr. Arthur Klein. Renowned, brilliant, cold. They said he could tell who would live within seconds of incision, that he focused his energy only on salvageable cases, that he called deaths early to conserve resources. He collapsed in that room during a case, massive MI, pronounced dead at the table. The corner where the shadow stood, exactly where Klein used to observe before scrubbing in. The night it changed, the shadow moved. Gunshot wound, teenager, DOA by the numbers. But something about him bothered me. Pupils fixed, no response, pressure tanking, but warm. Too warm for how long he's supposedly been down. As we worked, the shadow shifted, just slightly, a step closer to the table. "No," I said under my breath, surprising myself. Maya looked sharply at me. "What?" "Nothing. Keep going." I ignored the protocols telling me to call it, pushed harder, took risks I wouldn't normally take. We got a pulse back, weak, but there. The shadow froze, then seemed to thin, like smoke in bright light. The kid survived. After the final suture, the shadow was gone. Not just absent, finished, like it had been dismissed. I haven't seen it since. Trauma Room 3 hums, still fills with blood and shouting and impossible decisions. But the corner is clean now. Just wall and shadow where shadow should be. Sometimes, I think it wasn't there to cause death. It was there to witness it. And maybe, just maybe, it left when it realized someone else had taken over that role. If you work hospital logistics long enough, you stop seeing bodies and start seeing equipment. Beds, pumps, monitors, gurneys, they become the real patients. They get logged, cleaned, staged, moved. They leave trails. They follow rules. That's why the first time I found the gurneys lined up like that, my stomach dropped before my brain could catch up. My name is Evan Miller. Nights, Transport and Materials, Chicago Memorial South. I move what needs moving when everyone else is asleep. ER overflow, post-op transfers, morgue runs when the elevators are quiet. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. Or at least it used to be. It was a Tuesday, technically Wednesday, around 3:40 a.m. I was pushing an empty gurney back towards central storage after a psych discharge. The ER was dead. No admits, no trauma activations, no codes. I remember because I checked the board twice, hoping for something to break the monotony. When I turned the corner into the staging bay, I stopped short. 5 gurneys stood in a neat row against the wall, clean lines, even spacing, wheels locked, sheets pulled tight. They were all stained. Not fresh blood, old, brownish, soaked deep into the padding in irregular shapes. Sweat marks. Dark smears where straps had pressed into skin that fought back. The kind of mess you see after real work. But the log said 0 intakes since midnight. I stood there listening to the hum of the fluorescence, that faint electrical buzz that makes everything feel slightly unreal. Gurneys don't line themselves up, and environmental services doesn't miss stains like that. I checked the tags. All 5 were marked available. Last cleaned 22:15. Bullshit, I muttered. I radioed Frank, the night supervisor. Hey, did we get an unlogged run through ER? Nope, he said. Quietest night this week. Why? Because I've got 5 used gurneys pretending they're not. Pause. Probably old stains. Happens. These are warm, I said before I could stop myself. Another pause. Bring one down to decon. We'll deal with it in the morning. I rolled the first gurney out of the lineup. The wheels squeaked in protest, like they'd been locked in place too long. Halfway down the corridor, I caught a smell. Metallic, sour, unmistakable. The smell of work. As I passed Trauma Bay 2, the overhead lights flickered, just once. The gurney jolted like it hit a bump that wasn't there. I stopped. The hallway was empty, doors closed, curtains drawn, no footsteps, no voices. Behind me, somewhere far down the corridor, a wheel squeaked. I turned around. The other 4 gurneys were gone. I stood there longer than I should have, heart thudding, brain trying to assemble a rational explanation. Orderlies playing a prank, security moving equipment, fatigue. Then I heard it again, wheels rolling, slow, purposeful. The sound came from the direction of the old trauma wing, the one that technically wasn't closed, but might as well have been. Fewer cameras, fewer staff, fewer reasons to be there. I followed the sound because that's what the job teaches you to do. Don't assume, verify. The gurneys were there, lined up again, same order, same stains, like I'd never moved one at all. That's when I noticed something new. The straps were buckled, tight. I backed up, bumping into the wall. My reflection in the stainless steel cabinet looked pale, stretched. I unbuckled one strap with shaking hands. The metal was warm, not room temperature, body temperature. "Evan!" a voice called. I jumped hard enough to feel it in my teeth. Lena, an ER nurse, stood at the end of the hall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the gurneys. "Are you seeing this too?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Please say yes." She nodded slowly. They show up like that sometimes. Always nights like this. always quiet ones. "What the hell is it?" I asked. She hesitated. "Back in the 90s, before digital tracking, we had a run of unofficial intakes. Street stuff. No names, no charts. People who didn't want to exist on paper." "John Does," I said. "More like never were's," she replied. "They came in hurt, left, not breathing. Administration cleaned it up by cleaning it out." I looked at the stains again, really looked this time. Different sizes, different patterns, like multiple bodies, one after another. "They're reenacting," I said quietly. "No," she shook her head. "They're remembering." The gurneys shifted slightly, wheels turning a fraction of an inch, as if responding to being noticed. A monitor alarm sounded somewhere distant, then cut off abruptly. "You don't log them," she said. "You don't clean them. You let them finish." "Finish what?" I asked. She looked at the clock. 4:58. "At 4, she said, "they stop." And they did. At exactly 4 a.m., the stains faded. Not vanished, lifted, like something exhaled and took them with it. The straps loosened, the gurneys rolled apart, breaking formation, becoming objects again. By 4:05, they were just gurneys. Frank chalked it up to stress when I told Frank. Environmental services found nothing to clean. But now, every quiet night, I check the staging bay before I do anything else. Because sometimes, the gurneys are lined up again. And sometimes, one of them is still warm.
You don't need instruments to know when someone is watching you. Your skin figures it out before your brain does. A pressure between the shoulder blades, a tightening behind the eyes. In the ICU, we call it vigilance fatigue and pretend that explains everything. But room 417 never felt like fatigue. It felt like assessment. My name is Laura Bennett, RN. Surgical ICU Nights, Houston Medical Center. A hospital so large it has its own weather patterns and rumors that circulate faster than policy updates. I've worked critical care for 9 years. I know the difference between paranoia and pattern. Room 417 was a pattern. It sat at the end of the west corridor, slightly removed, always colder than the others. Facilities blamed airflow. Engineering blamed sensors. Nurses blamed luck. Nobody liked being assigned there, but no one refused outright, at least not officially. The room used to belong to Dr. Samuel Hargreave. Everyone knew that name. Cardiothoracic surgeon. Brilliant hands. Terrible bedside manner. He trained half the attendings who still worked here. He collapsed in that very room after a 12-hour case. Massive stroke, pronounced dead before sunrise. Administration called it tragic irony and moved on. The room didn't. The first night I had a patient in 417, I noticed the temperature drop immediately, not gradual, sharp, like someone had opened a freezer door. The IV leads felt cold against my gloves. The patient complained of chills despite stable vitals. I adjusted the thermostat. Nothing changed. Then I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being evaluated, not stared at, judged, like someone with authority was standing just out of view, arms crossed, waiting for me to make a mistake. I charted faster. Every time I turned my back to the bed, the pressure increased. When I faced the monitors, it eased. When I stood between the bed and the door, it was strongest, like I'd stepped into someone else's workspace. At 0:2014, the IV pump alarmed. Occlusion. Nothing wrong with the line. At 0:2016, the ventilator hiccuped. Brief, unexplained drop in pressure. At 0:20:18, the room temperature plunged another 3 degrees. Enough, I muttered, mostly to myself. I stepped into the hallway. The air outside was warm, stale, normal. When I re-entered, the chill wrapped around me immediately, precise and deliberate. The patient stabilized by morning. I handed off and didn't mention the room. The next night, Angela, another ICU nurse, cornered me in the supply room. "Did you have 417 last night?" I nodded. "Did it feel crowded to you?" That was the word, crowded. She told me she'd worked a code there 2 weeks ago, full arrest. During compressions, she felt hands hovering near hers, not touching, correcting. When she adjusted her technique, the pressure eased. When the resident missed a rhythm change, the monitor alarmed early. The patient died anyway. But it felt, Angela said quietly, like someone was pissed about it. After that, stories started surfacing, subtle ones. A nurse who felt breath at her ear while titrating drips. A resident who swore the room got warmer when he followed protocol and colder when he didn't. Environmental services refusing to clean the room alone after midnight. The room wasn't haunted, it was supervising. I requested 417 again, not because I wanted it, but because I needed to understand it. My patient that night was post-op, fragile but stable. I did everything by the book, triple-checked meds, adjusted lines with textbook precision. The presence stayed quiet. At 03:03, I cut a corner, just a small one, delayed a reassessment by 5 minutes to finish another task. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged. I felt that pressure again, heavier now, like disappointment given mass. The monitor flickered, not enough to alarm, just enough to notice. The patient stirred, heart rate ticking up. "I'm on it," I said out loud, heart racing. I reassessed immediately, corrected a borderline value, documented thoroughly. The air warmed, not comfortably, just permissively. I stood there shaking, the realization settling, slow and awful. Dr. Hargreave hadn't left. He'd stayed on rounds. I pulled his old evaluations from the archive system, notes filled with criticism, precision, obsession with standards, phrases like acceptable but suboptimal and corrected before harm occurred. He'd been ruthless but effective. The night it broke, the room got a patient it couldn't control. Massive internal bleed, rapid deterioration. We threw everything at it. The presence was overwhelming, air icy, pressure crushing, alarms triggering early and often. I felt like I was being paced, watched, judged relentlessly. "She's not going to make it," the resident whispered. "No," I said, louder than I meant. The pressure peaked, then fractured, like a held breath finally released. The room warmed suddenly, almost painfully. The alarms normalized. The presence retreated. The patient survived the night. Room 417 hasn't been cold since. Facilities says they fixed the airflow last month. Nurses stopped avoiding the assignment. The room feels like any other now, quiet, indifferent. But sometimes, when I cut corners elsewhere, I still feel it, that sudden chill, that silent expectation. And I correct myself because somewhere in this hospital, a standard was set that never truly expired.
Out here, radios are lifelines. In Nome, you learn that early, before you learn which snowdrifts hide ditches, before you learn which winds can peel skin through gloves. Cell service is a rumor. Satellites come and go. But the radio is supposed to be honest. My name is Avery Collins, lead medic, night rotation. When the sun disappears for weeks, you stop measuring time in hours and start measuring it in calls. Most nights are quiet, in a way that presses on your ears, the kind of quiet that makes you listen for things you shouldn't. The night it started, the storm had already closed the road north. Whiteout conditions, visibility measured in feet. We were grounded. No air, no ground beyond town limits. Dispatch knew it. We knew it. The map was effectively smaller. At 01:22, the radio crackled. Medic unit requesting assistance. I sat up straight. The voice was weak, clipped by static, but unmistakably calm. Too calm for a distress call. "Copy," I said. "Identify location." A pause. Wind hissed across the channel. Then, north of Safety Sound, marker 12. I felt my stomach drop. There is no signal coverage past marker 7. We all know that. We say it to tourists like a warning and to ourselves like a rule. "Repeat last," I said. "Your signal shouldn't be reaching us." Another pause. Then the voice again, closer now, like he'd leaned into the mic. "Vitals are dropping. We're losing him." My breath caught. I recognized the cadence before the name registered, the slight drag on consonants, the habit of softening commands into requests. "Ben?" I said. Silence. Then, faintly, patience crashing. Ben Harlow had been dead for 2 years. He was our best medic, the one who volunteered for the worst runs. He died during a blizzard, engine failure, exposure, found 3 days later with the radio still clipped to his parka, antenna snapped clean. I looked at Mara, my partner that night. She was pale, eyes fixed on the radio like it might bite. "You hearing this too?" I asked. She nodded once. "Dispatch," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Confirm caller ID?" Static answered me. Then Ben's voice, closer now, like he'd leaned into the mic. "Vitals are dropping. We're losing him." My training screamed no. Protocols stacked up in my head. Do not respond to unverified calls. Do not self-dispatch into closed zones. Do not chase ghosts. But Ben didn't panic. Ben never panicked. That's how you knew it was bad. "What's the patient's status?" "Hypothermic, weak pulse, not responding," he said. "We're out of time." The word "we" echoed strangely. Mara shook her head. "Avery, the storm." I know. The radio hissed again. Then Ben's voice softened. "You taught me this part. You don't wait when there's still a chance." I closed my eyes. I could see him as clearly as if he were in the cab, snow crusted on his lashes, that half smile he wore when things went sideways. "We can't reach you. There's no way in." A long breath crackled through the speaker. Wind. Then listen. The channel opened wider than it should have. I could hear movement, fabric wrestling, someone counting under their breath, CPR cadence slowed by cold. "Adjust compressions. Slower, deeper." A pause, then the rhythm changed. "Good. Like that." Mara stared at me. "This isn't real," she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too busy doing what the voice asked. For 20 minutes, we worked a patient we couldn't see. Ben described vitals that flickered in and out, breaths that caught, a pulse that refused to settle. The storm outside howled, rattling the bay doors like it wanted in on the call. Then, abruptly, the radio went quiet. "Ben?" I said. "Status?" Nothing. I slumped back, shaking, adrenaline crashing hard. Mara reached for my arm, grounding me. At 01:49, the radio crackled once more. "Time of death," then said softly. "Thank you for staying." I swallowed. "I'm sorry," I said. "We tried." "I know. That's why I called." The channel closed, hard. The display blinked and reset. We sat there until dawn smeared pale blue across the snow. The next night, the call came again. Same time, same location, same voice. We logged it this time, recorded everything. Maintenance checked the radios. Dispatch swore no outgoing signal existed from that area. The recordings, when played back, were corrupted, Ben's voice dissolving into static right when he said his name. The calls continued for a week, always during storms, always past the dead zone, always ending the same way. On the 8th night, the storm lifted. At 01:22, the radio stayed silent. We drove north first light, following Ben's last known route. At marker 12, half buried by drift, we found something new, a fresh depression in the snow, evidence of recent activity, boot prints that led nowhere, and a radio, resting upright, antenna intact, battery warm to the touch. No fingerprints, no signal. We brought it back. The calls never returned after that. But sometimes, when the wind is right and the night is long, I catch myself listening harder than I should. Because out here, help doesn't always come when it's alive. Sometimes it comes because it remembers who you are.
Waiting rooms have their own gravity. They pull anxiety out of people and leave it humming in the air like bad electricity. I've worked pre-op long enough to recognize the signs, the restless hands, the shallow breathing, the eyes that keep drifting to the clock as if time might argue back. Most nights it's manageable. You reassure, you explain, you wait with them. My name is Claire Duval, RN, Surgical Admissions, Nights, at New Orleans St. Bridget's Medical Center, a hospital that smells faintly of antiseptic and old brick, built high enough to survive floods, but not memories. The night I met Mr. LeBeau, the OR schedule was running behind, tempers were short, and the waiting area was nearly empty. He sat alone in Bay C, hands folded over a thin blanket, eyes fixed on the double doors that led to surgery. "You're early," I said gently, checking my clipboard. "We're still prepping." He nodded too quickly. "I don't mind waiting," he said. His voice was steady but tight, like it had been wound around something sharp. "I just don't like being forgotten." I smiled, the professional kind. "You won't be." His name was Henry Lebal, age listed as 78, procedure, exploratory laparotomy, nothing unusual, vitals stable, no family listed. That happens more often than people think. I checked his wristband, correct, asked the routine questions, allergies, last meal, pain level. "I've been here before," he said as I adjusted the cuff. "Most people have," I replied. "Hospitals blur together." "No," he said, more firmly. "This room, this chair." I paused, then chalked it up to nerves. It's normal to feel anxious. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Do you know how long they'll keep me asleep?" I explained anesthesia in careful, familiar terms. He listened intently, nodding, absorbing every word like it mattered more than it should have. "I don't want to wake up alone," he said. "You won't," I assured him. "I'll be right here until they take you back." That seemed to help. His breathing slowed. His shoulders dropped a fraction. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the hum of the building settling around us. At 2:17, the intercom crackled with a call for transport, not for Bay C, for another patient. "I guess they're busy," Henry said. "They are," I replied, "but they'll get to you." He smiled then, small, grateful. "Thank you for staying." When transport finally arrived for him, he stood without assistance, steady despite his age. As they wheeled him toward the doors, he looked back once. "Don't let them lose the chart. That's how it happened last time." Something in my chest tightened, but before I could ask what he meant, the doors swung closed. I went back to the desk to update the board. That's when I noticed it. Bay C was empty. No transport logged, no procedure scheduled under Henry LeBeau. His name wasn't on the OR list. I searched the system again, fingers cold on the keyboard. Nothing. I pulled the paper chart I'd been holding. It felt heavier than it should have. The front page listed Henry LeBeau, but the admission date was wrong. April 14th, 2005. I stared at it, pulse loud in my ears. The diagnosis line read, acute abdominal hemorrhage, status, expired, location, pre-op waiting, Bay C, time of death, 2:19 a.m. I checked the clock on the wall, 2:21. I went cold all at once, the kind of cold that isn't about temperature. I flipped through the chart, old notes, yellowed copies scanned into the system years ago, a nurse's signature at the bottom of the last page, someone I didn't recognize. Cause of delay? Misplaced chart. I walked back to Bay C slowly, like my body was bracing for impact. The chair where Henry had sat was empty, blanket folded neatly on the seat. The air felt settled, not quiet, resolved. I stood there longer than necessary, replaying every word we'd exchanged. He hadn't asked about pain, he hadn't asked about risks, only about waiting, about being forgotten. I took my break in the archive room that night, pulling old incident reports until my eyes burned. Henry LeBeau's death had been a quiet one, no code, no drama. He'd waited while staff searched for paperwork that never turned up. By the time someone realized he was missing, his pressure had dropped beyond recovery. The nurse who'd last spoken to him had written a note. Patient appeared calm, expressed concern about delays, reassured. No follow-up. The next night, Bay C was occupied again. Different patient, different chart, everything normal. But as I walked past, I felt that same pull, that sense of someone waiting very patiently behind me. I turned. For just a second, I thought I saw Henry sitting there, hands folded, eyes kind and tired. Then the chair was empty. I make a point now of staying with my patients longer than strictly necessary, of double-checking charts, of walking them back myself when transport is late. Because some people don't haunt hallways. They wait. And sometimes, all they need to move on is for someone to notice they were there.